Christian parenting. I'm Julie Lyles-Carr. You're listening to the All Mom Does podcast, part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. You may have noticed a new little jingle at the start of these podcast episodes in the last couple of months. That's because the All Mom Does podcast has become part of a phenomenal network called the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. And the Christian Parenting Podcast Network helps other podcasts, along with this one, get out to more people than ever before, to over 500,000 listeners. That is so much encouragement and inspiration going out to today's parents, and you can be part of helping to pay that forward. I would love for you to consider making an end-of-year gift to cpgive.org. That's cpgive.org, which goes to the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which will help them further the work of getting podcasts out to parents just like you. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard here this year on the All Mom Does podcast, I'd love for you to consider supporting the work of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network to help get more inspiration out to other parents. Today on the All Mom Does podcast, I'm your host, Julie Lyles-Carr, and I have Dr. Gregg Jantz with me. He's going to help us unpack something that we know were issues in days gone by, but seems to have really accelerated in some places potentially as we've all been navigating these times where a lot of us were not ready for 2020 to look like this. So, Dr. Jantz, thanks so much for being with me today.
Oh, yes. And isn't it true? Like 2020 was a lot different than what we thought this year was going to be.
Yeah. Didn't we all just have a girl crush on these numbers? 2020, the year of clear vision. 2020, the year that everything's going to come into focus. And then, wah, wah, wah. It has not lived up to the branding, has it, my friend?
Well, here we are. We're in the middle of a pandemic purgatory.
Okay.
And what I mean is, really, because we don't want to go back a few months ago. And where we are now is maybe not the greatest, and we look ahead to the future, and there seems to be some unrest, uncertainty, and the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is the high levels of anxiety that's, for some people, it's paralyzing them, and depression is high. Third thing we're seeing is high addiction rates, and so this is something that if we're not being affected by it, we know somebody.
Right. You know, I found it interesting as I was looking on the arc of your career and what a varied history you've had, all kinds of levels of expertise as you've been helping people get unstuck. One of the things I noticed is that you specialized very granularly for a period of time in eating disorders. And I just ran across an article that says that eating disorders are actually really flaming into fire as we continue, as you said, in this pandemic purgatory, this sort of endless loop, the song that never ends, all these things, this race that doesn't seem to have a finish line.
Right.
Have you found that to be true as you have been looking at your patients and the people that you help?
One of the things we have found is people are turning that we want to feel differently, and I get it. So what we know is right now alcohol sales, depending on where you live, up 500 to 600%.
Wow. And that's up from the beginning of the pandemic because I interviewed someone at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were seeing like 50 to 75% increases.
It's over the top. I did a little personal experiment at the supermarket not long ago. I reached my head around the plexiglass and I said, "Hey, what's the biggest seller right now?" And she made a joke. She goes, "Well, it's not toilet paper anymore. It's alcohol. We can't keep it on the shelves."
Wow.
And that's at one supermarket. And my point is, people are, because of anxiety, maybe because of depression, they're worn out. This has been a chronic time, and so people are turning to substances. Alcohol is just one. You brought us to food, and food's another one. Mm-hmm. We've heard the term COVID-15 for the 15 pounds that you've gained. Wow. But anything that mood modulates, changes how we feel. And so food is one of those. And right now, what I'm seeing is it's a painful time, but it can be painfully positive. Okay. We can have this time we can reset. We need to reset some things in our personal life. Otherwise, we're going to regret. And the regret will be alcohol, food, not taking care of ourselves. And so my word today is, yes, anxiety could be high. You could be on the edge of despair. Maybe you feel really isolated and maybe you feel really alone. Maybe it's compounded by if you have kids at home and now school is maybe online or partially online, you're trying to figure that out. So now you're really a teacher too, and you're also trying to maybe work. And the complexities have been layered, and there's a lot of layers of chronic stress right now. And I just want to acknowledge that.
Right. That it really is impacting people at deep levels. Now, speak to me about this, because I have those in my world that clearly know they are struggling with being depressed during this season. There have been some marriages amongst some of the people that we love that have really gotten rocky. There have been situations with kids that have gotten tough. But I'm curious to hear your take on those who might say to you, well, no, doc, I don't think I'm like depressed, but maybe there's sort of this low grade depression going on, that it's hard to get excited about much. There's really not a whole lot on the horizon. Everything's sort of meh. Are you seeing some of that with people? And how do we distinguish without feeling like we've got to tip over into something more dramatic maybe, but at the same time to acknowledge the challenge that can be?
Yes. I think there's a general blasé out there. And that's not a real clinical term, but it really describes, here's what we're seeing. People are digitized. In other words, we spend a lot of time in front of the screen. Yeah. We've been Skyping, we've been Zooming, we've been doing, everything's on screen time these days. And so there's that sense of, I've been digitized, which means emotionally, I'm blunted. I may find my emotions on the edge. I'm more irritable. I get frustrated easily. I'm more judgmental. I'm more critical. I get angry quicker. I feel fear and anxiousness. And I've been barraged all day by all the news notifications. And I'm chasing all the news every day. And by the end of the day, I'm worn out and I'm anxious.
Right.
And so that adds to that group of people right now that are feeling, I'm just feeling weary. I'm feeling some depression. Yeah, I'm still functioning and I'm still doing the things I need to do in my life. But you know what? There's that cloud over me that's just out there.
Right. And it does have its own level of draining that happens, and particularly when we don't recognize it, that we don't realize that it's playing a factor. Now, I have people in my world, and you may too, that honestly, the pandemic just hasn't been that big a deal for them.
Sure.
And I don't necessarily think they're in denial, but I think some of those folks almost feel a little guilty, like, well, gosh, am I not a functional human being? Am I not compassionate? Am I not empathetic in this situation? We're just kind of moving forward, and I just don't quite understand what the big deal is. Do those folks have a better level, if you will, or a stronger level of tolerance for this kind of stuff? Or they're just personality styles who can ride the wave a little bit more? Or do you think they are trafficking a bit more in denial?
Well, I think there are some people that this is affected in a different way. It could be even what career you're in. Real estate people they're just going crazy in a good way. So there's some segments of the marketplace, like people are, wow, they're really doing well. And then there's others, this is not a good time. And it seems like just the opposite. And that can really fuel that sense, maybe in some ways, of jealousy. You see, when we have a crisis or we have a pandemic, there's always those, because of the nature of it, that their business or their life will go pretty well. But there's so many that it won't. I was likewise talking to somebody he was in real estate. He goes, I'm a little quiet about how well things are really going because I know it's not that way for everybody.
Right. So talk me through, in this place where we have people who this is one of the most cataclysmic things that they have experienced. They're having issues with their job. Their kids aren't thriving very well in this hybrid school situation that's going on, or they may have loved ones who have suffered through COVID. They may have had health challenges, all the way to someone who's kind of like, I sort of kind of feel like I'm living my best life. Like some of the stress is off me. My business is booming. How do we give room to each other as fellow human beings to have the experiences that we're having? Because Dr. Jantz, I got to tell you, I'm a little floored at how divisive and aggressive things feel, at least within the social media space and these places where we interact, and the challenge that people are having, allowing each other to have their own experience. How can we do that without saying that we never have an opinion or without trying to be some kind of vanilla milquetoast kind of experience? But at the same time, how do we walk alongside each other in a way that is supportive and is not quite so weirdly competitive?
Well, one of the things I've noticed is during this time when we've been in this period of I just call it chronic stress, and it's not let up. Okay, so we get two things. We get cynical and judgmental and critical. And so it's easy to be very critical to almost anybody you come in contact with. We're critical about churches that are opening up. We're critical about churches that are not opening up. So there's a judgment around everything. Everybody's going to deal with what's going on differently. But what do they need from us? And we need it too. In fact, I have a reminder, and I'm looking at it right now on my screen. It says one person a day. I have a notification that comes on every device I have. It says one person a day, because we need to remember that one person a day God's going to put before us that needs a touch or a good word from us. And if we can show a sense of, I'm going to say love and acceptance towards each other, because we can still have a lot of disagreement. Oh boy, can we. But you know what? People change when they feel a sense of acceptance. And acceptance does not imply agreement. Okay, there's a lot going on right now that I see people doing that I don't agree with at all. But how am I going to reach other people? If I condemn, if I am adding to the flames that don't need to be added to, that's not helpful. So right now, I think we look, who's in our neighborhood, who may need a good word from us, they need a touch. But remember, there's one person a day that we can minister to or say a good word over.
I love that, one person a day. And that breaks it down into something that feels very doable, right?
Sure.
I mean, a lot of times we look at all of the need that is out there and the challenges that are out there and all of the volume that we have exposure to because we are so digitized at this point.
Yeah,
and it can feel overwhelming to know how to make a difference. But you're so right. Just one person a day, just tipping somebody who's delivering something for you a little bit more, or leaving water bottles and a couple of bag of pretzels on the front step for that Amazon driver. Those are such simple ways that we can impact one person a day. From a perspective of being holistic in the way that we look at our lives, if we feel compelled to share opinions or we feel compelled to add our voice into some of these topics that are so divisive, what is really a healthy way to do that and not just be stockpiling more of the same opinions and memes and diatribes and nasty comments on each other?
Well, one of the things is I always ask for permission to share. They may be saying something, let's say in the political arena, and you may just say, yeah, that's interesting. May I share a few thoughts? Always ask for permission to share.
I like that.
When you jump in, and it feels like a ton of judgments and you're pushing back, you've suddenly stepped into creating conflict. So I always ask, how can I have a discussion and maybe a real difference of opinion? The goal is to invite that without harsh criticism, harsh judgment, and really that other person needs to feel a sense of respect or honor, irregardless of differences. You may walk away from that conversation going, I just can't believe that. I cannot even believe them. They're not in, you can have your own opinions. But if you get into a battleground with them, what purpose does that serve?
Right. Are you making any headway at all? Right.
Right.
How can we do a heart check on our own motives and where our own emotional base is coming from when we feel this need to either post something that we know is most likely going to be inflammatory or adored by all of the people who believe just like us? How can we do that check to make sure that we are posting, pontificating, sharing opinion from the right place? Because I do know sometimes as people of faith, we can hold too far back and we don't step out sometimes when we should. But that doesn't really seem to be an issue right now for a lot of the people in my world. They're not holding back whatsoever. And I have to be cautious in myself to check my own motives. So what should I be looking for when I get ready to post or to ask permission to engage in a conversation about something that I know could be dicey?
And part of it is really, what do I want to have out there under social media? And when all this is over, what does it gain me? If I feel like attacking and I'm doing a lot of underhanded communication, that's really powerful judgments, where does that take me? My influence, and I don't mean be truthful with yourself, but I can be truthful and I can be damaging. And so we see too much of that out there. I really like inviting conversations versus inflaming conversations. For me, I know it sounds so simple, but one of the filters I run through is, well, what would Jesus do? I'm trying to run through a filter that would help me not be reactive, help me not to be one that's condemning or criticizing. Now, I can have my opinions, but if I just throw all that out there, I may be hurtful and I may cause more division with somebody that maybe I could really have a conversation with or a different relationship. Am I promoting division? Or am I creating an invitation for communication?
I love that. Talk to me about the connection between the heightened conflict that we do see on social media and all of the different opinions surrounding not just the political cycle, but everything from should we be quarantining and all the rest. And you referenced it earlier. Should churches be open? Should they not? And all the things that we're talking about. Is there a correlation between that level of aggression that we're seeing and depression and anxiety that we're seeing heightened levels of in this particular time?
Yes, absolutely. We know that repeated negative content and engaging with that in social media, that's what's going in. That's going to change how you feel. That's why I say at the end of the day, you're going to probably feel more anxious, more unsettled, and it kind of keeps you on an emotional roller coaster. The other thing I'm noticing is people lose track of time. How much time? How much time? It's kind of like asking a person who's struggling maybe with alcohol. You go, okay, well, how many beers did you have? And they go, I had 2, but it was really 2 6-packs,
Right.
you lose track.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what happens online. We lose track of time. And the 2 things I look for, how much time and how intense was the time spent. I think we need to put more guardrails of our time. I think we need to also remember we got to get outside. The new word is movement. Get moving.
Right. Make sure that you're getting your body out and moving around because it is so easy to stay locked in front of that screen for all the reasons, legitimate and those things that are not really feeding our souls. Yeah. Now, I am very curious for those who work in the mental health space. I had an interview with a good friend of mine who practices here in the Austin, Texas area. We had this interview at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I asked him, so what does this look like for all of us on the other side of this? How does this change us? How does this change our brains? And I got to tell you, at the time we recorded it, he thought, and many of us did, that this was going to be a 2, 3, 4 week experience. And he said as part of that interview, oh, well, no, this won't substantively change us because this is very short term. Now, if we were to talk about, 12 weeks or something like that, that would be very different. And Dr. Jantz, it was amazing because by the time we had that interview scheduled to air, by that point, it had become very clear that this was going to go on a lot longer. So we had to pull the interview, and I'm going to have to go back and interview him again at some point and just get his thoughts on this side. But I'm curious to hear from you. For many healthcare professionals, mental health care professionals, we didn't enter this thinking that it was going to be a longer term experience for people. A lot of us felt it would be much shorter. What are you seeing now? What are your thoughts now? And when I talk about coming out the other side, I think a lot of us have embraced the idea that it's not exactly a coming out the other side into what used to be. There are things that I think will have substantively changed by the time we feel like we have more of this under control with the virus. What are you seeing and what are your speculations about how things will have shifted, who we will be as a people, the impact this will have on children as they look back to their childhoods and this season in their childhoods? So tell us what you think.
I think we got to look at this and go, this is it. I'm going to make this a pandemic with a purpose, right? And so the terms like normal and so forth, I would say, forget about that.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
And part of the difficulty is people do not know what to believe. And what I mean by that is we've been told so many different things. We don't know what's true. We don't know who to trust. Is a mask good? Is a mask bad? What am I supposed to do, etc. So there's a lot of social confusion. Social confusion leads to social anxiety. So we're going to come through some things, and then it's going to be like, okay, do I give them a hug? Do I shake their hand? Do we touch? And people are kind of snooty out there. It just depends.
Yeah.
I saw somebody, they're riding their bike and there's nobody around them, but they got their mask on.
Right.
And so there's a lot of unnecessary fear. And unnecessary fear creates awkward social norms. So there's going to be a renormalization socially. I'm looking forward to today that in our schools that we get rid of a lot of plexiglass. Come on. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of that's created unnecessary fear. So we're going to have a new learning curve. Some people are going to have a hard time letting go of this. When the whole mask thing's over with, there will be people still wearing a mask because they're still afraid.
And, there are cultures that have always engaged masks for a long time. My son-in-law is from Japan, and for him, it's very confusing for him why there's even a debate. I mean, this is just something that you do. Not out of fear. It's something you do out of honor for others. So he's been very perplexed, even by some of the debate, and why are people wearing them out of fear? For him, it's just simply, this is how you're cordial. This is how you live in a larger society. So it is interesting, even within our own culture, how that makes a difference and how we see it. How do you think that children of this generation are going to remember this time? What do you think their experience will be as they think forward?
We need to remember that kids are like a sponge. They're going to absorb our emotions. If we've been living in a household and all they see is our fear and our anxiety, they're absorbing that. So I think we have an opportunity to make sure that we are projecting not an environment of fear. And I think for our kids, it's important to describe this as a season. This is a season. A season has a beginning and a season has an end. So if we can reference it that way, and that they see us create good during this season. It's the parent that is spending more time with their kids. It's us coming together and doing more physical things together. They're seeing that there is some benefits in this, so they're not carrying out just fear.
Right. We have experienced that as a family. I mean, the family dinner had gotten sidelined in many ways. We were band-aiding it by having a big brunch on Saturday mornings, but several of the kids had so many activities in the evenings and all of the different commitments that my husband and I had and our speaking calendars and all the things. So for us, it really has been a regeneration of some family time that's been a really beautiful thing. I'm going to be curious to see, even in watching some television shows and films that were filmed before all of this started, I got to tell you, Dr. Jantz, I've had those moments where I've thought, oh no, those people are too close together. Those people aren't wearing masks. And then I've laughed at myself going, well, this is fiction, A, and it was shot before all this started, B.
Yeah.
So do you think that we'll have some residuals of that are not really predicated on if we're fearful or we're overthinking or whatever? They're just going to be some strange norms that we've gotten that have become normative to us in this time that it may take us a little while to shake?
Yes. Remember, it takes 28, 30 days, depending on what you believe, to create a new habit, right?
Right.
So we all have new habits. We stay away from each other. We wear a mask, all these new habits. So when some of that begins to be removed, we're going to still have some old habits. So it's going to be an adjustment. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think that we will have a period of time? Because for a lot of us, life's gotten a little quieter. And for a lot of us, we've probably been operating in our pre-pandemic days at a level that maybe wasn't always so great for us. A whole lot of overstimulation, a whole lot of lack of sleep, and all of that kind of stuff. Will there be an endurance that we have to ramp up to when we begin engaging in life in a certain way again? I know I've been talking with some moms whose kids have headed back to the traditional classroom. And while many of those moms and those kids are excited for that, they're also discovering a fatigue level that they had not anticipated. And some parents who've reached out to me and who have said, I forgot what it's like to be on the hamster wheel of trying to get all the homework done and then get them to bed and then get them up in the morning and get them to school and all the, do you think we're going to find that maybe on the other side, we find a better balance now that we've been awakened to just how busy and overstimulated we possibly have been?
And that's part of what I mean. We have a chance to reset.
Right.
Because, we need to reset. Maybe it's the personal balance. We need to reset. Maybe it's how we care for ourselves. Maybe we need to reset our nutrition. but where do we need to make refinements? Because this is an opportunity to make some good changes as well.
Right, absolutely. Well, Dr. Jantz, I so appreciate you being with us. I know that you have the Center, A Place of Hope, where you do all kinds of exciting work. I know you have a ton of book titles that people can go and find.
I do want to say there is hope. Hope comes when we have a plan. So let's just start putting together some pieces to make a good plan.
Plans do help. I know a lot of our plans have been interrupted through the pandemic.
Yeah.
That doesn't prevent us from making plans to do some deep work and to help those alongside us.
That's
As you
right.
said, creating a pandemic that actually has purpose. I love that phrase. Well, Dr. Gregg Jantz, we so appreciate you being with us. So appreciate your wisdom and insight.
You got it. Good to be with you.
You'll find more from this episode on the show notes. Be sure and check them out at allmomdoes.com. And wanted to ask you a big favor. Be sure and go to wherever you are listening to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us get the word out about the podcast. Can't wait to see you next time on the All Mom Does podcast.